So box.
Hi, my name is Rochelle, and you're watching or listening to Box F1 Pod. Welcome to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix episode. If you are watching, then you will notice that I'm still not cooking, and that is because I was far too ambitious in my plans to be in a condition to cook a full meal. Every time I try to cook, I find I'm missing something. So anyway, we are once again not cooking, and fingers crossed, we will be back to prepping an F1 meal in Miami, which unfortunately not my top choice for my comeback meal. However, could be worse, could be Vegas. So instead today, we are gonna be drinking a espresso martini, a frozen espresso martini, which means something. I'll explain why. It means that we are, means nothing about we. The frozen martini represents, the espresso martini part represents the dirty air that we were forced to endure throughout this entire race. And the frozen part represents all the ice the drivers were chugging. Every picture is of them like crunching on ice because it was so hot. Toasty. So we will be sipping on that. Well, I will. With that, let's dive into the digital warm-up. Lap 1. All right, lap 1, off-duty F1. Kicking things off strong with Yuki Tsunoda's Bahrain photo dump. It featured, first of all, they played paddle together, and also him and Max. And then it also featured one of the greatest photos of Max I've ever seen, where he is sporting like the sports glasses that people wear. He's wearing those, a backwards cap. He's in his race suit, and he's just doing two peace signs like this. And what looks like a dressing room, like it's got one of those it looks like it's backstage somewhere. There's a bunch of Red Bulls. There's some weird model shots in the background. And it's got one of those mirrors with like the light bulbs all around it. So they're backstage somewhere, and Max looks excellent. And I look for Yuki's photo dumps. He picked up this tradition, I believe, from Pierre. And I would very confidently say, Pierre would not like me saying this, but I think that Yuki's dumping skills have far exceeded Pierre's. He does a really good photo dump. It's always well curated. It's always got some random things in there. It's always got food. It's always got like a cameo. It's always got like a fashion moment that Yuki is now a fashionista over here. Wait, sorry, entire side note that I did not even include this, but someone posted on TikTok their top 10 favorite Max Verstappen paddock outfits. It's just 10 different pictures of him wearing the Red Bull kit. Excellent TikTok. If I find it again, I will link it in the show notes, but it was so funny. All right, moving on to actual fashionistas. Lewis Hamilton is on the cover of Vogue. Huge moment. He looks great. Always said, I know I've had my critique of Lewis Hamilton's fashion moments. However, when he is styled, he looks excellent. And sometimes you can tell when he picked his own outfit that they're a little questionable. And again, also the juxtaposition of everyone dressing normally and then he's there in like a full like runway fit. But he explained it in the Vogue interview. I fully respect why he's doing it. And I do fully believe that drivers stepping out of their team kits is solely down to him. He looks great in that Vogue. And I know that since he's moved to Ferrari, his performance has left a little bit to be desired as he's adjusting and everything. But for like a brand moment, this has been a 10 out of 10 move for him. Like he's going to be this is the Met Gala issue. So obviously he's going to be at the Met Gala May 1st. Next week, right before the Miami Grand Prix. Good timing. He's in Vogue. Like him and Ferrari is just such a 10 out of 10 thing. Let's just hope his performance catches up to it, which I'm sure it will. Speaking of celebrities, George Russell. As if I could be talking about another George. Wait, have I talked about on this podcast how the show Gilded Age, which is like the American spin-off of Downton Abbey. It's not really a spin-off, it's just the same creator, but it's New York during the Gilded Age, and one of the main characters is Mr. George Russell, who, fun fact, if anyone watched White Lotus this season, Mrs. George Russell was in that. She's the one who almost got Nigerian princed by that Russian guy. Anyway, moving on. George Russell did an advert for one of Mercedes' sponsors named Einhall, which I guess do gardening tools. And it's just a very extensive video of George narrating as he does gardening with their tools, and how gardening helps him feel more connected to F1 when he's not on the track. And he like made little gnomes of people on the team, and like he was like, I just really like using the fastest tools there are. And it was a gardening commercial. He sounded so like he was peak posh in this. Peak posh. Oh, speaking of peak posh, George is really good at math, as we've come to learn. But Kimi Antonelli, there was a video. I think this was an old video back when he was still on F2, but it was him and Ollie in the room with their engineers. And Kimi's engineer was saying that Kimi remembers every single time he's ever set on track, and then just started whipping out random like Barcelona quality, this, like just whipping things out. And Kimi knew his exact time for each one of those. And I know that like remembering numbers doesn't directly correlate to math skills, but it doesn't not correlate to that. So I kind of feel like this whole I need help with my math homework was a bit that Kimi just played into. But in fact, I think he might actually be really good at math. Just like keeping it on the DL for whatever reason. Maybe if his mother finds out he's really good at math, she will make him go to uni. Although, let's be honest, as impressive as a uni education would have been, nothing he studies will ever set him up for a career where he will make nearly as much money. So really, this is the smarter path, other than, the danger and the limited time for a career. But otherwise, set up for life. Speaking of Kimi, okay, this is probably one of the most unhinged stories I have yet to have seen, and I think it involves it is due to the fact that we now have teenagers in F1. But last week, Kimi Antonelli was on the Fast and the Curious and told like an insane story. He's like, this was a very funny joke we did. This was such a funny joke. And then proceeded to tell a story about how he and Ollie Bearman stole Ollie Bearman's trainers / physical therapists credit card, bought a whole bunch of stuff on it, and sent it to the trainer's house. So they were like with the trainer, he's like, I'm getting all this stuff like delivered to my house and I don't know why. And they thought it was hilarious, but he couldn't remember what they sent to the trainer, or Kimi couldn't remember what he sent to the trainer's house. So he was like, well, Ollie will be on here next week, right? So just ask him. Lo and behold, Ollie came on the following week. They recounted how Kimi had told them this story, replayed the clip, and they were like, hey, so Kimi couldn't remember what you guys ordered. What did you guys order? And he was like, well, I can't tell you what we ordered because it's like personal to the trainer, etc. But what I can tell you is that we also one time stole his identity card, which means he couldn't leave the track. So he basically closed up garage and was like the last person there. And he's like cackling as he is saying this. And the hosts of the podcast are also dying of laughter, and at the same time look horrified that they invited these two teenagers on their podcast, and they've both voluntarily confessed to identity theft and credit card fraud. And Ollie's like, this is so funny. Like, he's like laughing, and the guy was like, I feel like you and Kimi and Haas and Mercedes would all like to say right now that you do not condone these actions and it is not funny. He's like, oh yeah, for sure, we don't condone it at all. And then Ollie also added, funnily enough, he's not my trainer anymore. What a story. Literally, what a story. Not only is part of this the fact that we've got little tweens now in F1, it also has to do with the fact that little tweens are not being media trained very well because they either have not been media trained or have decided to fully ignore the media training, because that's a story you keep to yourself. Or at least you tell your friends, but perhaps not on an international platform, perchance. But I love it. Please keep these unhinged, unfiltered stories coming, Ollie and Kimi. One of my favorite pieces, and this is like, by the way, is going to show the complete difference in age that we have on this grid. Because here we had a story about credit card and identity theft on one side from our little teenagers, and then we've got Alex and Carlos, who are 29, 30. And they were on their little podcast that they do. And it's actually one of my favorite pieces of content that is produced by anyone on the grid, because I feel like it really helps us get to know Carlos and Alex. And they're just like, they're given like prompts, but like they're sort of just talking with each other, and you're watching them get to know each other. You're seeing how they're different, but also how they complement each other and how they get along and how they respect each other. And it makes for some really wholesome and funny content. So there were two clips. This particular clip was quite funny. Carlos was talking about how he had finished school, and he was really proud of the fact that he had finished school, and he was actually about to go to uni, but it was at the same time that he had to do the World Series, and without the World Series, he would have never been able to get into F1, so he had no choice but to not do uni. And Alex goes, or Helmut Marko would. And then like does like a hit motion, and Carlos laughs, and he just does like a finger across his neck. He's like, or Helmut Marko would. And they both just sit there giggling, and it's very much a trauma bonding giggle over having to endure Helmut Marko. At least that's how I'm interpreting it. It felt a little traumatized. The little shared giggle felt traumatic. But the wholesome clip that I was referencing was, they were talking about how they, help feel at home or like grounded when they're traveling so much. And, Alex went on this little rant about how Thailand to him smells like home. Like, whenever he like lands in Thailand and goes outside, the smell just makes him feel like at peace and at home. And in order to try to emulate that when he's on the road, he travels with a diffuser and just like blasts lemongrass in his hotel room and like wherever he is, just to like emulate that vibe and to like bring him down and calm him down. And Carlos goes, wow, that's so interesting. I don't. Like, he didn't say it in a, like, that's weird as shit. He was like, oh, I don't do that. I try to use the same toothpaste no matter where I go. And it just sounded so funny. Because literally, the conversation was, I travel with a lemongrass diffuser wherever I go because it makes me feel at home. And it smells like Thailand. And Carlos goes, yeah, I don't. I try to use the same toothpaste. And like obviously his point was like he tries to stick to a routine and tries to make everything the same no matter where he is, so it doesn't like throw him off too much. So like the same toothpaste, the same pillow, the same like whatever. But it sounded so funny following this like very deep and emotional explanation of smell and home and like everything that Alex said, and Carlos was like, toothpaste. I feel like that sort of, I don't want to say airheadedness, but sort of like head in the sky sort of vibe that he exhibited in that clip is very much why him and Charles got along, because they both sort of have those moments. But it was quite funny. Speaking of Charles, one thing we learned is, okay, so you guys remember at the beginning of the season when it was raining in Melbourne and Charles went on the radio and was like, there's so much water in here, it's like so wet, I'm like swimming, and his engineer goes, must be all the water. And Charles goes, wow, add that to the words of wisdom. And everyone thought it was so funny. Turns out he's actually documenting all of his funny radio messages over the years. And he's like, we all like add to it all the time. And we literally call the like book where we keep it the words of wisdom. Which makes it so much better, and I'm so glad he does that because he has some of the funniest moments. There is no way "no, I am stupid" isn't in there, and then he just has so many good ones. The one where he was like, tell Carlos to do this, and then Carlos didn't do it, and his engineer's like, oh, we tried, but he just wouldn't do it, and then Charles goes, try telling him in Spanish. That was rather funny. I just love that he's documenting this because he does have some of the best ones, and he's getting sassier and sassier on the radio, which I'm loving. It's more often than not giving good humor and sass versus the horrifying PTSD trauma like responses that he had when Javi was on the other line. I definitely think this is a better fit, even though we still have communication issues. Like, it's wet, must be the water, like so unhelpful. But at least Charles doesn't sound like distressed at all times. I'm about to crunch some ice like the F1 drivers. Gonna really channel them. Wow. Did you hear that? Is this ASMR now? I'm out of ice. Okay. Last thing was actually not, it is off track, but it was after the race, so Monday, today. Wow, I just literally forgot every word. George Russell posted on Instagram him, Lando, Alex, and Carlos playing paddle, presumably back in Monaco. And this is a very important update, actually, because like 2 weeks ago, Carlos had said in one of his interviews that he never gets invited to play paddle. So this is huge. I'm very excited for him. I believe, at least in DTS, this was Max. So either he got replaced by Max full-time, or Max was unavailable, or George didn't want to invite Max, or Max was just not in the mood, although he must be over it by now. But whatever, we'll get into that later. All right, moving on. Lap 2 trackside at Jeddah. So drivers were greeted at the airport with bouquets of flowers, like very pretty bouquets of flowers. They were like white and pink, and they all looked very pleased, but simultaneously perplexed. It's sort of like the face that Charles usually has on, but they all had it. Like, they all looked very happy with this turn of events, but also confused why this was happening to them. And at first it was really confusing because I think the first picture I saw was Liam and Isaac, I think he says it Isaac, giving, I forgot who it was. They were handing flowers to someone, and everyone was from a different team, and everyone was like, what's going on? And then we saw Carlos and Charles walking through the airport with their flowers. And they honestly looked like they were just got married or something. But that was very cute. And then more pictures started coming out, and we saw the reps from Saudi Arabian Grand Prix there greeting them at the airport with flowers, which was very cute. Jeddah had a very odd collection of celebrities attending. There was Usher, Diplo, Major Lazer, and of course, last but not least, Jennifer Lopez. She was wearing a baby pink latex suit, which seems horrible in Saudi Arabia, given how all the drivers looked exceptionally hot at all times. I can't imagine she was in any way comfortable. I honestly, at first didn't recognize her when she took like a picture with all the Ferrari mechanics and engineers, and I was like, who is this woman? And her bodyguard is like glaring at all of them, and I thought he was glaring at J-Lo at first, and I realized it was her bodyguard. There was a picture of her and Lewis that Ferrari like posted and labeled iconic, and all of the comments are just like still like going after J-Lo. They're like, who is this person? I don't think this is iconic. Where'd she come from? Why is she here? J-Lo not catching a break anytime soon. But yeah, she was there. There was a video of her in the garage, and she was trying to go to Lewis's car, but Lewis's car was being worked on, I guess. They wouldn't let her near it. So she was like, okay, fine, I'll be with this car. Like, forced to take a picture with Charles's car, and I'm not sure how to tell her that it's the same car, but whatever. In other news, Alex Albon forgot his phone at the press conferences on the couch, and the next group found it, and it was Max, Isak, and Fernando, and they took a bunch of selfies on Alex's phone, which he later posted and captioned 911, I would like to report a robbery. Actually, you just lost your phone, Alex. It wasn't stolen. But love the bands. Love that they took a bunch of selfies, and they were like the classic selfies, like really low, so it's like just all their faces. 10 out of 10. Max has been getting a lot of sass this week. During the pre-race press conference, Crofty was there, and he asked Max about Helmut Marko saying in the media that he's really worried about Max leaving. And Max responded that all he's doing is spending his weeks brainstorming with the team on how they can improve the car. And Crofty goes, okay, so Helmut has the wrong end of the stick then? And Max says, how about you focus on commentating and I'll focus on driving? Okay, the sass. Everyone in the room laughed. Crofty laughed too. He was blushing a little, but he laughed, and he was like, we just worry about you. And Max just gives him a thumbs up. Honestly, I don't blame Max's attitude in the media, particularly British media, because they are generally quite rude to him, but it did make me laugh. I also can only imagine if he had said that to Ted Kravitz or Martin Brundle, who are much more active haters of Max and who would have like held on to that for so long. But also further like not shit that he's getting, but he's being talked about a lot in the media. But James Vowles, I assume was asked about Max, about whether he would sign Max in an interview. And his response was like unnecessarily detailed. He said, I don't think anyone in the room would deny that he's extraordinary in what he can do. Verstappen's performance in Japan was, for me, jaw-dropping. Well done to him. But he comes with a lot of downsides as well that you have to acknowledge. What Mercedes does have is a great culture with two drivers that are delivering near to the peak of the car, and with one that's on the way up. So I personally don't think that's the place for him. Okay. While I agree with the sentiment that Mercedes is not the place for him, both because of the driver lineup they currently have and because he's just like culturally a terrible fit for Mercedes, I just don't think they vibe. Why did James Vowles have to say he comes with a lot of downsides? What are his downsides? Being the best driver on the grid? His father, maybe? He doesn't really have anger issues anymore. I know today seemed like he does, but he doesn't really have anger issues anymore. He's very focused. He's very calm, cool, collected, and he's very, very good. So other than Jos Verstappen, not really sure what the downside is. All right. And with that, we conclude the digital warm-up. On to analysis. Okay, so we're starting with quali. Yuki, before I hit quali though, Yuki crashed in free practice, but he did end up rallying for quali. It was a pretty rough crash, but obviously they were able to fix the car and he was able to really thrive in quali. There was a full red flag like 2 minutes into Q3 because Lando made just a tiny little mistake, went over a curb and just slammed directly into the wall. It was a really, really, really bad crash. The commentators described it as the rear end is just so much more squirrely. Squirrely. They really enunciated every letter in the word squirrely. Lando called himself a fucking idiot on the radio. He sounded rather out of breath. Max immediately went on the radio to ask if he was okay. Oscar also gets told that Lando has crashed and he says, is he okay? Max got pole by 1,000th of a second and he whooped on the radio. I haven't heard Max whoop in a while. He was like, woohoo, simply lovely, lads. He says simply lovely every time, but it's always chill, whatever. But it's just so much better when he's worked hard for it and he knows it's just not going to come to him naturally, which is I think how it felt for a lot of the last couple of years, but like him having to fight for it, I feel like is also more exciting for him, and hence the more exciting celebrations, because it wasn't guaranteed. And 1/1000th of a second is crazy. So one recurring theme this weekend was broken water systems. First, we had Oscar phone in saying that, unlike last week, his water system is actually working this time. However, it seems, that it's all in his helmet, which seems rather inconvenient to me personally. And then Isaac had literally the same issue. He was like, I literally have water flying around my helmet. It is annoying. I can't do a French accent. I'm just going to say it in an American accent. I literally have water flying around my helmet. It's annoying. And his engineer goes, keep your tone down. He was so chill. Is his engineer? His engineer sounds European. Surely he's heard a French accent before. Like, Isaac does not. We've heard Isaac agitated on the radio. He is calm AF here. Still my favorite radio from Isaac is the, oh no, I have crashed the car. But anyway, he was very chill. I don't know what his engineer was getting in a huff about, but he was very calm. All right, so the starting grid is as follows. Max Verstappen, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Kimi Antonelli, Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton. He outqualified Lewis again. Yuki Tsunoda, Pierre Gasly, Lando Norris, Alex Albon, Liam Lawson, Fernando Alonso, Isaac Hadjar, Ollie Bearman, Lance Stroll, Jack Doohan, Nico Hulkenberg, Esteban Ocon, Gabriel Bortoleto. Apparently, Lance set a new record, beating Kevin Magnussen for most Q1 exits. And I think it was like 17, which is not that many. Lance Stroll Q1. That's a lie. It was not 17 times. It was 75 times, which, yes, is quite a bit. But still, you're honestly never going to find me hating on Lance Stroll. I'm so sorry. I thoroughly enjoy him. Okay, thoroughly is a bit dramatic, but I think he's rather enjoyable. And I think that Lawrence Stroll gets a villain edit that he doesn't necessarily deserve at all times. Perhaps sometimes, but not at all times. I think he's much more complex than that. And he seems like such a good dad. Whatever, this is not my Lawrence Stroll defense moment. We're moving on to the race. So the race was, I don't know, it wasn't like boring, but it certainly had nothing on Bahrain. And I'm so concerned that that was the first and last time we're going to have an interesting race due to strategy and opportunity for racing. And I seriously fear that the cars are so close to each other that all this dirty air is just going to prevent us from seeing anything interesting in terms of actual racing. However, it is but the Melbourne, Japan, China, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, fifth. It's but the fifth race, and we have 24 races in the season. So that means we have 19 more races to go. So it could significantly get more interesting. And we'll still have this battle for the World Drivers' Championship. So there's going to be interesting stuff. I would just love to see some racy racing. Still my favorite term. All right, so let's kick things off with some standout performances and key moments before I get into the actual meat of the race. It's not the meat of the race. Everything like worth a lot of discussion happened within the first 5 seconds. But I will talk about all the other things that happened during the race because there were some moments that are worth mentioning before I really get into Max and Oscar, basically. All right, so key moments / standout performances. Liam. Although he was having one of his best weekends so far in 2025, P12, he did end up getting a 10-second time penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage against Jack Doohan, which I don't particularly understand because I watched it, then I watched the replay, then I watched it again, and I didn't think he did. Like, he overtakes Jack on track. It seems like he went off a little bit later, but that's not leaving the track and gaining an advantage. That's like track limits, I guess. I don't know. And he got a 10-second penalty. which I think is actually the penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage, unlike what happened to Max, because that was a unique incident. But he didn't leave the track and gain an advantage. If they were trying to fine him for exceeding track limits too many times, then they can do that. But unless I'm blind and stupid, both of which are very possible, he didn't leave the track and gain an advantage. I don't really know what's going on. All right, moving. Gabriel. This was basically a non-issue, but Gabriel and Fernando did have like the barest of contacts, which was Gabriel's fault, but nothing happened to either of them. They both were able to continue in the race. But of course, Fernando is Gabriel's manager, so that just made things funnier. And the amount of jokes Gabriel got due to this contact was hilarious. Oscar made a comment in the cool down room. We'll talk about it, but everyone was like, "Ooh, what's going to happen to him now?" Not his manager. It is rare that you get to race your manager, so I feel like this doesn't happen often, that you might crash into your manager. However, Gabriel is at a disadvantage that his manager seems to think he's still a rookie. Just kidding. By the way, I hope that Fernando somehow rallies. I don't know. I think he's still here for the first year of the 2026 the new regulations. So I really hope that a better car will warrant better performances from him, because I really want Fernando to go out on a high. Like whatever's been happening so far is so boring to me. And like, it's not worthy of Fernando Alonso, and I would just really like to see him do well. He was asked, by the way, if he thinks it's worth Adrian Newey's time to work on the current car, or if he should be fully focused on 2026. And he said that that's fully up to Adrian Newey, and he trusts his judgment completely. And it seems like Adrian Newey is focused on 2026. So to see anything in this car with Adrian Newey's like flair, unlikely. So, oh my God, hoping, praying that he does better with the next car. Okay, Lando. So I think everyone was expecting Lando to spend the whole race, or at least a lot of this race, catching up from P10 to the top of the grid. But actually, with the safety car and like whatever else circumstances, he was up at the top pretty fucking fast, which is rather impressive given how much dirty air everyone was experiencing. Most of the battles, honestly, on track were him trying to get forward. The most notable one of them all was with Lewis. Lewis was defending against Lando for like at least 2 laps, and it was a stellar performance in defense. And honestly, like a bit embarrassing for Lando considering how much better the McLaren is to the Ferrari. But you could literally see like the big brain energy working in Lewis, and like the way he was positioning his car and like anticipating all of Lando's moves and like really working with what he had. It was very impressive, and obviously just reminded me that he's a 7-time world champion. And like, it's nice to see. I know he's been struggling lately, but like, it's just been nice to see his brain at work. Unfortunately, Lewis in general had a shitty weekend, particularly compared to Charles, who outperformed him by like 30 seconds. And I really hope he gets the hang of this car, because like, the sprint race was insane, his performance, and like you really saw that spark back in him. But like at the moment, he is so dejected. He's like walking around giving the most unhinged interviews that I almost feel like he would have never given at Mercedes. Like, they're way too honest and depressing, honestly, to have passed PR vibe at Mercedes. Like, he literally this weekend said he was asked what needs to happen for him to like jive with the Ferrari, and he was like, I think I need a brain transplant. Like, he was always so confident, and he's not confident. I don't blame him, because he's like really been struggling at Mercedes and now at Ferrari. And I don't know if it's these regulations that just don't gel with him. I don't know if it's because he's old. I don't know what it is, but like, he is struggling, but like, we still see glimpses of this like world champion. We know he's in there. And I don't know what needs to happen to pull that out again, but I would really like to see, it's the car, because Charles is an incredible driver, and he's been stuck with not a great car. I almost don't know if Carlos still being here, if none of this had happened and Carlos was still here, it would have been rough to see also, because Charles got his first podium this season now, which is only the 5th episode, but still, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like not all of it is Lewis, but we've seen him struggle with the Mercedes. Now we're seeing him struggle with the Ferrari, and he's experiencing it and he doesn't enjoy it. So whatever it is that's not clicking, I need it to click. And maybe 2026 is the year that this happens. Maybe it's not this year, because like these regulations are ending. We're seeing all the cars just like smushed together. They're so close. There's so much dirty air. I don't know if this is the year we see Lewis thrive. Maybe he doesn't. But then again, he spends all this year getting used to the car, and then in 2026 is an entirely different car. So like, I don't know what is going to happen, but like, it's just like a bit sad to see Lewis Hamilton going around saying he needs a brain transplant. It's giving Lando, and it's just like, get over it, Lewis, please. Like, we need the confidence back. All right, so Charles had a great day. He was literally the tire whisperer somehow. These tires were degrading like nobody's business. It was a one-stop race, but like, it's so hot. The tires cannot properly handle it. You really need to manage your tires effectively. And Charles did. Also, of course, we know the Ferrari's not great. It is actually probably below mediocre. And the fact that he was able to chug it along to P3, 10 out of 10. And honestly, a lot of that is probably Lewis holding Lando back during that battle. I think that helped a lot. I also would like to take a moment to say thank you to the cameraman who in Park Firm just zoomed in on Charles's face as he's drinking, and Charles like smiles at the camera, but then the cameraman didn't pan away. Oh no, he just kept going in. He just kept zooming and zooming and zooming. And you know, when you zoom in on your own face, it just gets worse and worse the closer you get. Charles's was getting better. Charles's face needs to be studied. Like, who objectively, who the fuck looks like that? That is a museum piece. He is objectively flawless. But he was very aware. I know they always say they're aware of the cameras, but like, he was very aware the camera was zooming the fuck in. And he was like sipping on his water, and he was giving a little side eye, like not directly at the camera, but he's like, why is this camera still on me? But my God, he looked beautiful. I think there was one person one time who I said Charles is the most beautiful objectively Formula One driver, and he said, what do you mean? What about Max Verstappen? No shade to Max Verstappen, but even Max Verstappen would giggle if someone said he was more beautiful than Charles, because Charles is not like, Charles is AI, honestly, I fear. He is just so pretty. Also, speaking of cameras zooming into you, on the podcast that Alex and Carlos do, Carlos went on this whole rant about how drivers are not celebrities. Like, it's weird. They're like all weird people. They're like, everyone thinks they live in this weird universe, and they're like on a different level. And like, there's people like taking pictures of them at the restaurant, and like paparazzi following them, and he thinks it's so weird. He's like, why can't I walk through the paddock with my girlfriend and be left alone? And then literally the next day, he's walking through the paddock with Rebecca, smiling at the cameras, kissing her cheek, like fully playing it up. And I just found it so funny. Also, little wag aside, Rebecca and Alex, Charles's girlfriend, were obviously together for multiple years because Carlos was at Ferrari, but they were seen hanging out this weekend in Saudi Arabia, and it was just cute. I'm just so glad they're still friends. And we haven't seen it yet from what I'm aware. Did we see it? Did we see Lily and Rebecca hanging out? Because I've seen Lily and Alex, but I haven't seen Lily and Rebecca, and I feel like that's an essential piece of content. So I hope we see that soon. All right, but that was a great segue into Williams. So today, Williams scored double points, and it was all through the power of friendship. It was very reminiscent of Carlos giving a toe to Lando during that one race where he won, and he was giving Lando a toe just so the people behind them didn't overtake them. Because if they overtook Lando, they would have overtaken Carlos. So instead, Carlos slowed down just enough so Lando could be in his toe and he could drag him along without letting anyone behind them pass. And that's basically what they did today. Carlos was ahead of Alex, and he maintained just the right distance so that Alex could get a toe from him, and they left poor Isaac Hadjar in the dust. Isaac spent like half of this race trying to overtake these fucking Williams, and he just could not. And after the race, he was like, this is just so frustrating. But they're teammates, and so there's nothing I could do, and I tried, and I just could not get past them. And he was like, but this is a very good idea. Like we would have done the same. I don't think they would have. This feels like a Carlos special, now that he's done this twice. And they did, in fact, Carlos did say after the race that they discussed this particular strategy, but they were thinking they were going to have to use it against Pierre versus against Isaac, but obviously Pierre was out. And like, just Carlos' strategic mind sort of reminds me of like, in like sports movies when they do like an absolutely absurd play that makes no sense, it would never happen in real life. There's so many, but the one that's coming to my mind is in Glee when they had Kurt lead the football team in the single ladies dance. Or no, he did the single ladies dance and distracted everyone and then scored because everyone's like, what the fuck is happening? That's sort of like the energy that Carlos's strategic calls give. But like, I'm obsessed with it. And like, I just hope we continue to see these very weird strategy calls that work. And maybe one day it'll win him a race. I mean, it has in the past, but maybe with Williams, he could win a race using these absolutely ridiculous. Honestly, maybe him and Isaac will start singing him and Alex would just start singing Smooth Operator while dancing around the track to Smooth Operator, and everyone will be so confused that they'll just zoom past everyone and win. Maybe that's the next strategy. I'm just kidding. He has much more strategic strategies than that. But but there was a cute moment where after the race, Alex and Carlos pulled up next to each other and like thumbs upped each other for a job well done. Very good. Also, Carlos got stuck in his car after the race and no one noticed. He's like waving around, trying to get someone to pay attention to him to help him like unbuckle out because like something was stuck and he couldn't get it out. And finally, like a random Sauber mechanic notices him and like wanders over and helps him like release whatever was stuck, so he pops out. But it was very funny. He's like, hello, and he's like wiggling his fingers trying to get someone's attention, and no one was looking over at him. So let's get into the first lap incidents that we had. There were two, starting with Pierre and Yuki. So this was our very, very first incident and pretty much our only incident other than the one that was happening at the same time, but we'll get into that in a second. So right at the start, Pierre and Yuki had contact, and it was literally the barest of contacts. Pierre went flying into the wall. His car was literally like fully destroyed. Yuki managed to limp back to the garage, but like they could do nothing to resuscitate the car, so he was forced to retire from the pit lane. So this was definitely a racing incident, but obviously there's always someone to blame a little more than the other. And here, so after the race, Pierre did an interview, or after his race, the race was still going. But during his interview, he said, I know Yuki's intentions. I know him very well. He didn't mean anything bad. It's just an unfortunate outcome, which is a very lovely statement to make. They do know each other very well. And obviously Yuki didn't mean anything. But like when you hear that quote, it sounds like Pierre felt like Yuki was more responsible than him. But like, I watched the incident and I rewatched the incident. And to me, it definitely seemed like it was more Pierre's fault. Like he seemed to be attempting a move to overtake, and it was like a very ambitious move, like where it's happening like in a very, very narrow part of the track. Like there's no way they're both fitting. And either he assumed that Yuki would move or that like he somehow would fit. But like Yuki didn't, and in fact I don't think it was intentional. Like he was like, I'm not moving. I think he just like didn't even process that it was happening, and so he like barely clipped Pierre before he had a chance to move out of the way, and the crash happened. But like Pierre put himself in Yuki's way. It's not like Yuki barreled into him. However, like that's just like, if we're really going to get down to nitty gritty, this is whose fault it is. But really, it is a racing incident. There's no penalty to be served. There's nothing for the FIA to do here, rightfully so. But it is just a shame that both the races ended before we even got through half of the first lap. Because Pierre has been really fast and qualifying very well lately. Flavio Briatore said he thought they could get 6th, which perhaps they could have. We'll never know. And hopefully Flavio doesn't blame Pierre, because that sounds stressful. Flavio scares me. But also like Yuki qualified so well, and like I think he did Q3 last week as well, and like he's finally getting into the groove. Is that a thing? Is that a term? He's getting into the groove of the Red Bull, and like I would have really liked to see how he would have done today. But unfortunately, we just never got to see that outcome. All right. Now let's move on to the main topic of this race, Max and Oscar. So at the start, it already looked to me as if Oscar was ahead of Max. At least not ahead, but they were definitely wheel to wheel. Like he got off so fast. It felt to me like they were lined up with Oscar a little bit ahead, but I think that must have been just the angle. But like immediately, Oscar was basically wheel to wheel with Max. And as they went into the first corner, I think, and I guess everyone else thinks besides, Max and Red Bull, that Oscar was ahead of him at the apex. He looked ahead. Which I guess according to the F1 rules, that means it's his corner. Max didn't move and Oscar didn't move, which inevitably made Max go off track. But as he went off track, he went back on track, still ahead of Oscar, retaining P1. So naturally, like my first thought was he should give the spot back. And everyone else thought he should give the spot back. Oscar gets on the radio and says, I was ahead of the corner. He needs to give me the spot back. And that's, by the way, I think all Oscar said about this whole situation. Max got on the radio and said he pushed me off. Okay. But then immediately we're hit with a safety car, and I'm not exactly sure if you're allowed to swap positions during a safety car, if you have to wait for the safety car to end in order to swap, or if you have to at least give an indication that you're planning on swapping. But regardless, the Stews are investigating this during the safety car, and then once it ends, they issue a 5-second penalty to Max Verstappen. His response to this, when GP told him, like, just for your information, we've been given a 5-second penalty, Max goes, well, this is bloody lovely. And GP was like, okay, Max, no comments, please. Thank you. But that's basically all we hear from Max. We know he's not pleased with the penalty. And we know he's doing his darnest to create a 5-second gap, at least, because he still needs to go through the pit lane and come out ahead of Oscar. Obviously, he fails to do that. Like, the McLaren is the better car. Oscar's on a roll. Like, Max, there was not much Max could do. And I think perhaps if this incident had never happened and he had retained the lead coming out of the start, then he probably could have won. However, given the way things went, I don't think he had a chance of winning. And once he had pitted, and like you could see him like trying to get back out on track ahead of Oscar, and he just had no chance. Oscar was like way ahead. Now, whether this penalty was warranted is definitely up for debate. Some people are saying it should have been a 10-second penalty, which in fairness, usually leaving the track and gaining an advantage is a 10-second penalty. But others are saying that the FIA should have just told them to swap places, which I think is also fair because, I actually think that is what should have happened. Because I think it also like ruined the whole race for us because they just had, if they had just swapped places, there was an opportunity for racing, I think. But like, given how it went, when Oscar overtook Max while Max was in the pit lane, basically, so there was no racing. And we were sort of robbed of the opportunity to watch some racing and watch them battle for first. It was just sort of like a switch off, basically. Which would have definitely made for more fair racing. And while that might have been inconsistent, the FIA is still like relatively inconsistent with their rulings, so it's not like it would have been crazy. The reason FIA gave for giving a 5-second penalty instead of a 10-second penalty is because it happened in lap 1, and because these situations are more common in lap 1, they are giving some leniency, which is why he was granted a 5-second penalty. There was another little thing that happened during the race that no one ever brought up again, so I don't know if that means it's irrelevant, but Max gets told that he needs to watch track limits or something, and then he responds to GP that during the driver's briefing they said they weren't going to punish for that. I don't know if that's related to the leaving the track and gaining an advantage thing, or if that happened again later. It sounded like it was related to the penalty, which is why he was annoyed, but I'm not sure, and no one ever talked about it again, so like I don't know. But speaking about the FIA's ruling, in their document about the incident, they say that Oscar's car was alongside Max's car at the apex of the corner, and therefore that makes it Oscar's corner, rather than also saying that Max was never gonna, they were like wheel to wheel, but Max was never gonna make that corner, regardless of whether Oscar was there or not. So their reasoning for issuing this penalty is very strangely worded, and I believe that Red Bull is currently appealing this decision. So far I don't believe it's been successful. I don't think it will be successful, but after the race, Christian Horner was like flying around with a picture of the cars at the corner printed out. He has it printed out right here. It's right here. And presumably, I think it's because of the language in the FIA documentation where they said that they were wheel to wheel, and he has like a still of Max being ahead. However, I think you can say anything about a still, but like you need the full video. Oscar was ahead at the corner. Whether Max's statement about Oscar was never intending to go in at that corner was relevant, I don't know. I do know that Max was not going to make the corner, and that to me is what matters. But what I find most interesting was Max's behavior after the race. So I would like to start by pointing out that Max's radio as he drove into Park Ferme was exceptionally calm. Was the whole team a bit annoyed? Yes. Like, GP says good race. Christian goes on and says, like, we both have our opinions about turn 1, but this was a good drive. And Max was like, yeah, exactly. Good job to the team. We did the best we could, etc., etc. Very, very chill, like a normal Max post-race radio. But when he goes up to do his interview in Park Ferme, he's literally anything but chill. He gets asked about the turn 1 incident, and his response is, I'm going to keep it short, thanks to the fans and thanks to the team. Looking forward to Miami, and just walked away. On the one hand, I think it is relatively mature of him to not say a whole bunch of shit on live TV, which is the predicament that Lando finds himself in week after week. Max was angry. He knew he was angry, so he'd rather just keep it short and sweet to avoid saying something he would regret, or that would get twisted, or that he would get fined for, whatever. But like, the thing is less so about his chosen response to manage his anger and more about like, why is he angry? Because like, I always say that Max gets angry when he thinks something could have been avoided. If it was like his own mistake, the team's mistake, whatever it is, if an outcome could have been avoided by, like, reasonably avoided by him or his team, he gets pissed off. And I do think he thinks that his move was not worth it in the end and that he should not have done it. He's not going to say that, obviously, but I think he's kicking himself a little bit for that. I also assume that he is probably pretty peeved at the penalty from the FIA, which he can be annoyed. I think anyone would be annoyed, but for him to be this pissed is weird. Like, he was calm on the radio. He had the whole race to come to terms with what happened. This is a level of anger that just doesn't make sense for him or this situation. Like, I know everyone has their theories about whether he's like he must be super angry at Oscar, or he's salty that Oscar used his own move against him and it worked and here he is in second place, or that the FIA, or he's pissed that the FIA isn't handing out wins to him anymore, which they never did, but whatever. I also don't think he thinks the FIA is no longer giving him wins. I don't think he thinks the FIA ever did. I don't think they did. I don't think he's mad at Oscar using his own move against him, because I think he would actually be rather impressed by that. And if he wasn't so furious, I think he would respect it quite a bit. And also, he's not mad at Oscar. Oscar has nothing to do with his anger. Even if he is genuinely just pissed off that he got this penalty, he's not mad at Oscar. He's mad at the penalty / the FIA. But I still don't think that's quite it. And I do have a theory, because I have spent quite a bit of time analyzing Max Verstappen's like Hulk out moments. And I think I've come to know him pretty well. I know him so well. That's like a very healthy statement to make about a person I do not know. But anyways, I think there's something else going on here, because his anger does not even subside after Park Firm. And like historically, Max doesn't get angry to this level about this stuff. Maybe he did at 17, but now, the way Max is now, there are certain things that do upset him, but never to this level. And it's not just because he got a penalty. It's just not. But there is a theory that I've seen floating around that I do genuinely think makes sense. And I will get into that. But I first want to talk about the cool down room and the interviews before I get fully into that theory. Okay, so the cool down room is pretty much just Charles and Oscar being like, okay, so Max is mad. Let's just like talk as much as possible to distract from all this. And maybe no one will notice that Max looks like he's about to pop the fuck off. So they're literally chatting so much. Oscar is like, it's so hot. Wasn't it so hot? It was so hot. And Charles goes, on lap 28, I started counting down. And that got a little giggle out of Max. So progress. And then Charles was like, OMG, the marbles from the tires. He was like, did you have marbles, Oscar? Did you have marbles, Max? And Max responded something, but they muted him for some reason during his response. So don't know what he said, but he did interact. And I feel like Charles was like cheering in his head. He's like, yes, it's getting better. It's fine. And then basically once turn one incident was no longer on the television, I feel like they relaxed a little and they started playing other replays. And when they played the Gabriel and Fernando incident where Gabriel like just barely touched him, Oscar goes, oh, Gabby might not have a flight home anymore. And that got Max to giggle also. So that was nice. On the podium, I know they don't even have alcohol in the champagne bottles, and the non-alcoholic, whatever it is, 7-Up, doesn't spray particularly well. But after the national anthem and both Charles and Oscar start spraying each other, Max doesn't even bother pretending to spray. He just starts downing it. He just literally just starts downing his 7-Up. Maybe he was hoping, I don't know, but it was rather funny. Also, not related to Max's behavior, just a quick aside, Mark Webber watching Oscar Piastri on the podium was giving Kris Jenner like you're doing amazing, sweetie. And to be honest, he was like taking pictures and like it was very much giving Kris. And to be honest, Oscar is doing amazing, sweetie. Like, I don't know if he has anything on Kim, but 10 out of 10. Mark Webber should be very proud. All right, in the post-race press conference, we got some interesting questions and answers. Oscar gets told that Lando has just said that Red Bull has the faster car. That's not exactly what Lando said. Lando said Max was clearly faster than us today, and I don't know why everyone's making stuff up about us being so much better than everyone. That's not the case. So it wasn't exactly Red Bull has the faster car, but it was sort of alluded to he thinks that Red Bull was faster today, and that their car is not that great. So he gets asked if he agrees with that, and Oscar goes, no. He's like, certainly the Red Bull was faster today, but I wasn't surprised that Max was fast, but we still have the stronger car. He was more saying that like, we weren't as strong as we have been in other places here. And I'm not surprised that Max is fast. I don't think anyone else is surprised that Max is fast, but we have the faster car. And Lando never said that McLaren doesn't have the faster car, but it was kind of implied. And then Max gets asked his POV about the start and that turn 1 incident. And he said, well, I did the start and then it was lap 50. And then he basically just said, I don't want to talk about it because I'll get a penalty. And then Max gets asked if he's happy. Someone was like, Max, are you happy? Okay, I guess we're doing existential questions in the press conference room now. But Max goes like, it's just like, I'm happy. It's just like social media and the way the world is generally, which is also very existential. But he's like, your words can be twisted, and so he prefers not to give people the opportunity to do so. Fair. The next question is, he's asked to clarify exactly what it is you're upset about. Is it because of the swearing thing? Like, why are you angry at this moment? And he was like, no, I know I can't swear, but you also just like can't be critical of anything. Like, let me get the sheet out. There's a lot of lines on here of what you can't say. That's why it's just better not to talk about anything. And this leads me to the theory that I've seen about why Max is so upset, which I think I agree with, assuming what we're assuming here is true. Basically, there's a video going around of the FIA president, Mohammed bin Sulayem, going up to Max in Park Firm and talking to him. And he very frequently goes up to drivers and talks to them. He just like loves to engage with them in that way. Not that any of them want to engage with him, but he does love to do that. But it's usually rather brief. But when he came up to Max, he was saying something much longer than just like, oh, congrats or whatever the fuck. Like his moment with Oscar, he just shook his hand and Oscar walked away. Here, he's clearly saying something to Max. Max does not look happy. He responds something and they're talking for like a minute, which is longer than he talks to most drivers. And the theory that's floating around is that he told Max he can't criticize the FIA for the penalty. Obviously, this is all conjecture. This is all assumptions. But being told what he can or cannot say, being censored in any sort of way, certainly aligns with the things that would piss Max off to this degree. More so than a penalty he doesn't necessarily agree with or losing first, like he would be upset, but like this level of fury is odd given any other theory out there. And it also explains why he had this sudden mood change from like being really calm on the radio when he crossed the finish line and being like, oh, okay, well, it is what it is. And then just being like, I cannot say what I want to say, so I'm just not saying anything. See you in Miami. And it also aligns with his weird cryptic messaging about society and social media and the media and et cetera, et cetera. And then also his little not rant, but like his sentence about you can't just not swear, you also just can't critique anything, which was an odd thing to say because like it's not like that's been a topic of conversation, the inability to critique anything. So that seems like a fresh thing that he's brought up. So all of that aligns with the idea of Mohammed warning him against saying anything anti-FIA. I guess we'll never actually know why he's upset unless Helmut Marko like comes out and gives an interview, which like, where is Helmut Marko? Where is he when you need him the most? You usually can't shut him up. And here we are like needing to desperately know what the fuck is going on, why Max is so upset, and he's nowhere to be found. I would take his hyperbolic exaggeration, dramatic retelling of whatever it is over nothing. I want to know what is going on in the house of Red Bull. All right. There was also a very funny clip of Alex Albon finding out what happened. He was like very excitedly telling the interviewer in the media pen that he's flying home with Max. And the guy was like, oh, well, hopefully that's not rough or something like that. No, because like, what do you mean? What happened? Where did he finish? And the guy's like, oh, he finished second. And he's like, oh, what? Like at first, like confused, like why would Max be that upset about finishing second? Like that's like, you could see his mind working. Like, he's like, what caused him to not finish first. And the guy was like, he got a penalty for gaining an advantage while leaving the track. And Alex's brain is still working. He's like, oh, I guess I'll sleep on that flight. Which made me laugh, but like, he still seemed perplexed why Max would be so angry that he wouldn't be able to talk to him on the flight. And why this interviewer was like warning him so aggressively. I really want to know how that flight went. Was Max angry? Was Alex subjected to Max-plaining? I'm sure he was. Or maybe Max was so mad he just didn't talk. Maybe Max was over. I don't know what happened. But Alex knows the full story. I assume Helmut Marko knows the full story. There are people out here who know the full story, and I would really like them to share it, because I do not believe for a second that Max is this pissed off just about a penalty. I don't believe he's this pissed off because Oscar beat him. I don't think any of that's true. Something else is happening here under the surface, and I just want to know what it is. All right, so results. Driver of the day was officially Max Verstappen. Putting the incident at the start aside, I don't think he had a bad race. Like, he maintained second. He did the best he could. And honestly, in relation to all of the recent drivers of the day that we've had, this is certainly the most warranted that we've seen. But I definitely think there were other performances that should have been celebrated. Charles, the tire whisperer, who like took a severely mediocre Ferrari up into the podiums, deserves all the praise. Also, Kimi finished 6th, still the best performing rookie this season. He does have the best car, but he's still the best performing rookie this season. But apparently he also had a stomach ache this whole race. There was a video of him after the race, like literally being propped up by his father as they walk through the paddocks. And he like can barely walk. He looks done. Like, he is sweaty. He looks exhausted. James Vowles walks by and he like attempts like a half-hearted hello to him, and then James Vowles comes over and congratulates him on his performance, and he like smiles, and he knows that thing that you do like when you end a meeting at work and like your smile immediately drops. Like, he was struggling. So A+ to him for finishing 6th with a stomach ache. And I also think part of it is like definitely the heat. Like, there was definitely like mild heat stroke going on there. Like, that combined with not feeling well definitely exacerbated whatever was going on. But he was just so small and sad looking. It made me sad. 10 out of 10 from him though. But everyone, also like not just him, like everyone who was not having a stomach issue also looked dead. Oscar said this was one of the hardest races he's ever done. They were all tired and spent. Everyone was spent. I'd mostly like to give this honor though to Oscar, who this is the first win this season that wasn't from pole. And as many have pointed out, he's now leading the World's Drivers' Championship, and he's the first Australian since his manager, Mark Webber, to do so in 2010. So that's 15 years ago. That's crazy. Also, this really puts Lando's contention for the Drivers' Championship into question. Of course, it's early days. Of course, Lando is still very fast, but to be fair, it does put it into contention. And it also really puts into perspective why it's so hard for Zach Brown to pick a number 1 driver. To be fair, he hasn't really needed to do that so far. They haven't really had to like race each other. But it will happen at some point. Zach Brown maintains that it's not going to be as big a deal as everyone's making out to be, and perhaps not, but it's still probably going to happen at some point this year. And at one point, McLaren will have to choose a number 1 driver, and I just don't think they can. I get it. They're both great. They're both in contention for the Drivers' Championship. They're the only team within that position. So I get it, but it's gonna be an issue, and it's the only thing that's giving Max or literally anyone else an advantage, because they just like can't decide. I also just really want to study Oscar Piastri's attitude and just like his brain, because like he's literally chiller than the White Lotus mom on Lorazepam. He is so calm. Like, he gave a woohoo at the end of this race, and that was the most emotion I've seen from him ever. Like, how is he like this? Like, how is he this calm and level-headed? Because genuinely, this will win him anything. He has one of the best attitudes. Is he drugged? Like, is it lorazepam? Because how is someone like this? It's comically impressive, like, truly. Dick in the box, I know, like, probably Max, but not for the reasons that everyone is saying. I think he just shouldn't have attempted that move at the beginning, and I think he'd probably agree once he's calmed down and moved on, but, like, that was pretty dickish. But truly, I think the real dick in the box is FIA. They're inconsistent. They're sensory. They're just like they're a bad vibe, and I just don't want them around anymore. Or they need to change. They need to fix something because they're being so ridiculous and they're constantly mishandling all of these situations. If Mohammed Ben Sulayem truly went up to Max and told him not to discuss his feelings on the penalty or else he would get in trouble, that is insane behavior. That is like some Soviet communist shit and then needs to change. Like, I would rather have Susie Wolf, who has a very severe case of bias against her in this position, than have him walking around censoring people. Anyway, race results. Oscar Piastri, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, George Russell, Kimi Antonelli, Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz, Alex Albon, Isaac Hadjar, Fernando Alonso, Liam Lawson, Ollie Bearman, Esteban Ocon, Nico Hulkenberg, Lance Stroll, Jack Doohan, Gabriel Bortoleto. And 2 DNFs, Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly. Wow. 2 friends out. All right, so the standings are as follows. Oscar with 99 points, Lando with 89 points, Max Verstappen with 87 points, George Russell with 73 points, Charles Leclerc with 47 points, Kimi Antonelli with 38 points, Lewis with 31 points, Alex Albon with 20 points, Esteban Ocon with 14 points, and Lance Stroll holding on strong for 10 points in the 10th position. Oscar has exceeded Lando by 10 points in the World Drivers' Championship, and Max is only 2 points behind Lando. Lando needs to get his shit together, truly. He could take a page out of Oscar's book in terms of it being calm, cool, collected. He could take a page out of Max's book in the responses he gives to the media to avoid creating headlines and like crazy out of context statements. Like, he needs to get his head in the game, as Zac Efron would say. The team standings are McLaren with 151 points, Mercedes with 93, Red Bull with 71, Ferrari with 57, Haas with 20, Williams with 19, Aston with 10, Racing Bulls with 7, Alpine with 6, and Kick Sauber with 6. Still think it's crazy that we have not a single team with 0 points this year. And that was not the case last year, or the year before. Anyway, that's it for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Next up, we're headed to the States in just a couple of weeks for the Miami Grand Prix. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe, share with any potential boxes, and follow on social at BoxBoxF1Pod to keep up in between races. And hopefully, I'll be cooking for Miami, and please send me any suggestions because I actually do not know what to make for Miami. Until next time, Box Box.